I didn't think much of the rules when I first saw them. That was probably my first mistake. People leave instructions for old places. That was how I explained it to myself. Old buildings always have little habits. Don't run the washer while the shower is on. Don't slam the screen door because the latch sticks. Don't touch the breaker marked pump unless you want to spend the rest of the night without water. My father's fishing lodge had plenty of those kinds of problems. It sat at the edge of Rowan Lake, 6 miles inside Black Ash National Park. At the end of a service road the park only plowed when they felt like it. The lodge itself was a low, long building with green siding, a tin roof, and a porch that faced the water. Behind it were 5 rental cabins, a bait shed, a storage garage, and an old ranger outpost that hadn't been officially used in 20 years. Most people who came through were fishermen, hikers, and families passing through on their way to nicer parts of the park. They stayed one night, maybe 2. They bought worms, rented boats, complained about the phone's signal, and left. It wasn't the kind of place I ever expected to own. My father, Leo Dorsey, had run it for almost 30 years. Then he disappeared. That is the word everyone used because it was easier than saying what they meant. He went out one morning before sunrise to check the dock and never came back. His boots were found on the East Pier. His thermos was still sitting on the counter behind the register. His truck was in the lot with the keys in it. The park searched for him for 9 days. Divers went into the lake. Rangers walked the shore. Volunteers checked the ravines and old logging trails. They brought dogs. They brought boats. They brought drones. Nothing came back except a single orange fishing bobber that had been tied to his key ring since I was a kid. They found it floating near the lodge dock on the 10th morning. After that, people stopped searching. The lodge went to me because my mother wanted nothing to do with it, and my father had never remarried. I was 34, recently laid off from a warehouse dispatch job, and sitting on more debt than savings. I had no wife, no kids, and no good reason to stay in the city. So I drove north and took over Dorsey's Landing. That was what my father called it, though most park maps just called it Rowan Lake Lodge. I hadn't spoken to him much in the last few years. There was no big dramatic reason. We were just the kind of family that got quieter after my mother left. He didn't know how to say he was sorry, and I didn't know how to stop waiting for him to say it. The last time I saw him alive was at my grandmother's funeral. He hugged me with one arm and smelled like lake water, cigarette smoke, and black coffee. He said, "You should come up sometime." I said, "Yeah, I will." I didn't. When I arrived at the lodge, the first thing I noticed was how ordinary it all looked. The parking lot was gravel with weeds pushing through it. There was a faded ice machine against the wall, 2 vending machines that buzzed constantly, and a crooked sign that said live bait, boat rentals, cabins, coffee. Inside, it looked like every small roadside business I had ever been in. Pegboards full of hooks and lures. A chest freezer with bags of ice. A rack of postcards. A pot of coffee that had stained the glass brown years ago. A radio behind the counter. A cash drawer. A dusty computer running a reservation system that looked older than me. There were deer heads on the walls and old photographs of men holding fish. My father was in a lot of them. Younger, heavier, smiling in a way I barely remembered. The place smelled like pine cleaner, damp wood, minnows, and burned coffee. For the first week, I was too busy to feel much. The park concession office gave me a thick folder of permits, tax forms, inspection notes, and emergency procedures. I learned how to turn on the gas for the cabins, how to reset the water pump, how to take deposits, how to charge boat rentals, and how to order bait from a guy named Mercer who came every Thursday in a refrigerated van. I also learned that running a lodge mostly meant fixing things people broke. Cabin 2 had a toilet that ran unless you jiggled the handle. Cabin 5 had a porch step that tilted if you put weight on the left side. The card reader froze twice a day. The office printer jammed if you loaded more than 10 sheets. The old security camera monitor behind the desk showed 4 grainy angles: the parking lot, the dock, the cabin row, and the porch facing the lake. At night, the place got quiet in a way I had forgotten quiet could be. Not peaceful. Just empty. There was no traffic noise. No neighbors. No sirens. No people talking outside. Just wind moving through the trees, the refrigerator compressor kicking on and off, and the slow knock of boats nudging the dock. The park road passed 3 miles above the lodge, but after sunset, almost nobody came down unless they already had a cabin. The diner at the junction closed at 7. The nearest ranger station was 40 minutes away if the road was dry. I slept in the back room behind the office. My father had converted it years before. Twin bed. Old dresser. Small bathroom. A wall heater that ticked all night. I told myself it was temporary until I figured out what to do with the place. Sell it maybe? Run it through the summer, pay down a little debt, then sell before winter. That was the plan. Then I found the binder. It was wedged behind a stack of old fishing licenses in the cabinet under the register. Black cover. No label. The plastic had cracked along the spine, and the metal rings inside were rusted. At first, I thought it was an old maintenance log. The first pages were exactly that. Notes in my father's handwriting about the septic tank, generator, cabin repairs, boat numbers, propane deliveries, and mouse traps. Then the notes started to change. They became shorter. Less like maintenance and more like warnings. Bell still works. Do not move East Pier chair. Cabin lights at 12:11. No guests. Radio used Mom's voice. Counted 6 boats. Only 5 in water. I stared at that page for a long time. My father had always been practical to the point of being boring. He checked tire pressure before road trips. He labeled leftovers. He kept receipts for screws. He did not write creepy little sentences in binders for fun. I flipped further in. Near the back was a folded sheet of yellow legal paper. It had been folded and unfolded so many times the creases were soft. Across the top, in block letters, my father had written, "Rules for the lake." There were 7 of them. 1. Keep the porch light facing the lake on from sunset until dawn. If it goes out after midnight, do not go outside to fix it. 2. Never rent cabin 6. There are only 5 cabins. If someone insists they stayed in cabin 6 before, refuse once and step away from the counter. 3. If someone knocks on the lake-facing door after midnight, answer without opening it and say, "Closed until morning." Say nothing else. 4. If the radio calls for Warden 12 and uses your full name, turn the volume all the way down and write the time in the log. Do not answer. 5. Count the boats at 10 p.m. and 4 a.m. Count from left to right. If there are 6, stop counting and stay inside until sunrise. 6. Never let anyone fish alone from the East Pier. If you see your father there, ring the brass bell 3 times and look at your feet. 7. The lake returns what is named. Do not say the name of anyone you want back while looking at the water. Under the last rule, in smaller writing, he had added, "Especially not mine." I remember laughing once under my breath. Not because it was funny. Because I didn't know what else to do. I stood there behind the counter, holding that paper, listening to the bait fridge hum and the old building creak around me. Then I folded it back up and put it in the drawer beside the cash box. I told myself my father had been alone too long. That made sense. A man lives by himself at the edge of a lake for decades. He loses sleep. He drinks too much coffee. He hears animals in the walls and voices on the radio. He starts making patterns out of nothing. That explanation worked for almost 2 nights. The first incident was so small I'm embarrassed by how much I think about it now. It was my second Friday there. I had 3 cabins occupied. Cabin 1 had a retired couple from Duluth. Cabin 3 had 2 college kids who were trying to catch pike. Cabin 5 had a man named Evan Marsh and his teenage son, Toby. Nothing unusual. A rainstorm came through around 9. Not heavy, just steady. Enough to make the gutters chatter and turn the parking lot dark. I was behind the counter entering receipts into the reservation system. The software was called Campos 4.2, and it ran on a beige computer tower that sounded like it was full of bees. At 9:47 p.m., the printer woke up by itself. It made that grinding sound old printers make before they decide whether they hate you. A receipt slid out. I looked at the computer, expecting an error message. There was nothing. The screen showed the same reservation list. I picked up the receipt. It was for 1 night in cabin 6. Guest name, Leo Dorsey. Paid in cash. Check-in time, 9:47 p.m. Balance due, $0. I stood there with the receipt in my hand and felt my face get hot. The first thing I did was check the system logs. I had spent enough years in dispatch to know computers do weird things when old data gets stuck in them. Maybe my father had made a test reservation. Maybe the system had restored something from backup. Maybe Cabin 6 had existed years ago and burned down. There were no logs. No reservation. No record of the receipt. Just the paper in my hand. I walked to the front window and looked out at the cabin row. Cabins 1 through 5 sat under the trees with their little porch lights glowing yellow in the rain. There was no cabin 6. Of course there wasn't. I almost threw the receipt away. Then I remembered the rule. Never rent cabin 6. I felt stupid even thinking about it. Still, I folded the receipt and slid it into the black binder. Then I locked the office door, checked the porch light, and went to bed. I didn't sleep much. The next morning, the receipt was gone. Not misplaced. Gone. I took every paper out of the binder. I checked under the counter, behind the register, in the trash, between the pages. Nothing. At 10, an old park ranger came in for coffee. His name was Arthur Vale, but everyone called him Art. He was the first person who had come by after I arrived, and he had known my father for years. He was retired from the park service but still wore green pants and heavy boots like he couldn't quite stop being a ranger. He had a gray mustache, a stiff walk, and hands covered in sunspots. He poured coffee into a paper cup and said, "You look like you saw something." I almost told him. Instead, I said, "Printer acted up last night." Art added powdered creamer and stirred it with a wooden stick. "Old place," he said. "Things act up." He said it too evenly. I watched him. "Did there used to be a cabin 6? The stir stick stopped. Just for a second. Then he dropped it in the trash. "No. That's it. That's it. My father wrote some rules." Art looked at me then. I expected him to smile or roll his eyes. He didn't. "Did he?" he asked. "Yeah." "Well," Art said, putting a lid on his coffee, "Leo was good at keeping this place open. That doesn't answer anything." "No," he said. "It doesn't." Then he left $2 on the counter for a coffee that cost $1 and walked back into the morning fog. I could have packed my bags that day. I think about that a lot too. But fear is strange when it's not right in front of you. During daylight, everything looked normal. The cabins needed cleaning. The bait order was late. A family checked in and asked if the Wi-Fi worked, even though the website clearly said no Wi-Fi. The retired couple returned a boat with mud all over the bottom and apologized 5 times. By afternoon, the receipt felt like a dream. By evening, I had talked myself into staying. The second incident happened at 10. I was following the rules by then, though I told myself it was just because they matched good routines. Keeping the porch light on made sense. Counting boats made sense. Not answering the radio at random made sense. At 9:58, I stood behind the lake-facing window with the logbook open. There were 5 boats tied to the dock. I counted them left to right. Green rowboat. Blue rowboat. Aluminum skiff. Red canoe. White rowboat. 5. I wrote it down. 10 p.m., 5 boats. The rain had stopped, but the lake was still dark and moving. The porch light cast a pale cone across the wet boards and the first few feet of water. Beyond that was nothing. I started to turn away. Then I saw someone standing on the dock. Not clearly. Just a shape near the boats. I froze. It looked like a man in a raincoat, facing the water. I blinked and leaned closer to the glass. The dock was empty. I told myself it had been a post, or the shadow of the porch rail, or my own reflection in the window. That would have made sense, except my reflection was still there when the shape disappeared. I checked the camera monitor. The dock camera showed static. Only the dock camera. The other 3 angles were normal. I tapped the side of the monitor. The dock image rolled once, flickered, and came back. Empty dock. 5 boats. I wrote, camera static, in the logbook because I didn't know what else to write. At midnight, someone knocked on the lake-facing door. 3 soft knocks. Not loud. Not urgent. Just polite. The lake-facing door was at the end of the office, past the coffee station. Guests didn't use it. Nobody did. It opened onto the porch and faced the water. I had locked it after sunset. I sat behind the counter for a few seconds, not moving. The rule came back to me before I did. If someone knocks on the lake-facing door after midnight, answer without opening it and say, "Closed until morning." Say nothing else. I looked at the clock. 12:04. Another 3 knocks. I got up quietly. The floorboards creaked under me, and I hated how loud they sounded. I stood about 6 feet from the door. The porch light was on outside. I could see its glow around the edge of the curtain over the door window. I did not move the curtain. "Closed until morning," I said. My voice came out flat. There was no answer. I waited. Then something on the other side of the door leaned close enough that I heard wet fabric brush the wood. A man's voice said, "Ryan?" I had not told anyone at the lodge my first name except the guests who checked in. But my name was on the sign-in desk, on the business license by the door, on the credit card receipts. There were plenty of ways to know it. That was what I told myself. I stepped back. The voice said, "Brian, it's cold." It sounded older. Hoarse. Like someone who had been shouting for a long time. I put both hands on the counter behind me and gripped it hard. "Closed until morning," I said again. The rules said say it once. I said it twice. I still don't know whether that mattered. The person outside made a small sound. Not a sigh. Not a laugh. Something in between. Then the porch boards creaked, slow and heavy, heading toward the steps. I waited 10 minutes before I touched the curtain. When I finally pulled the edge back, the porch was empty. The floorboards outside were wet from rain. There were no footprints. The next morning, Cabin 5's guest came in looking irritated. Evan Marsh was a tall guy with wire glasses and a red baseball cap. His son Toby stood behind him in a hoodie, staring at his phone even though there was no signal. Evan said, "Somebody walking around last night?" I kept my face neutral. "What time?" "Late. Midnight, maybe. Heard someone on the porch." "On your cabin porch?" "No. Down here." He pointed toward the lakeside. "Then out by the water." "Thought it was you." "Wasn't me," I said. He looked past me toward the window. "There was a man on the dock." Toby looked up. "You saw him too?" Evan turned. "I told you to stay inside." "I did stay inside." I asked what the man looked like. Evan shook his head. "Couldn't tell. Raincoat, maybe." "He was just standing there," Toby said. "He didn't have a face." His father snapped. "Toby, I'm not joking. Go wait outside." The kid rolled his eyes and went out. Evan leaned closer. "My son gets worked up. He reads too much online. But there was someone there." I said I would check the cameras. He asked if I had footage. I said yes because I didn't want to explain. But the system had recorded nothing from the dock camera between 11:58 p.m. and 12:19 a.m. Just black. Not static. Black. Like someone had placed a hand over the lens. I didn't mention that to Evan. He and Toby left that afternoon, cutting their stay short. Evan said they had to get back early for work, but he didn't look at me when he said it. I comped half their second night without being asked. After they drove away, I found 3 fish hooks lined up on the counter. They were old. Rusted. Bent almost straight. I don't sell hooks like that. I put them in the trash. 10 minutes later, they were back on the counter, lined up exactly the same way. That was the first time I called my mother. I hadn't talked to her in almost a month. She answered on the 5th ring, sounding distracted. I told her the lodge was strange. She said, "Of course it is. Your father lived there." I said, "No. I mean, did he ever seem off to you? Near the end?" There was a long pause. "Ryan, I wasn't there near the end. But when you were..." She breathed into the phone. "Your father changed after he bought that place." "How?" "He got quieter. He was always quiet. Not like that." I waited. She said, "He used to call me some nights and not say anything. I'd pick up and hear water." "What kind of water?" "Lake water, I guess." "Waves." "Wind." "Sometimes the dock bell." "There's a bell? You don't remember?" I did, after she said it. A small brass bell mounted on a post near the east pier. My father had told me it was for fog when I was little. I had not gone near the east pier since arriving. My mother said, "He told me once that if you ever came up, I should tell you not to stay." My throat tightened. "When did he say that?" "Years ago." "And you didn't tell me?" "You weren't speaking to him." I thought it didn't matter. I looked out at the water. The lake was flat and gray. "Mom." "What? Did Dad believe something was wrong with the lake?" She was quiet so long I thought the call dropped. Then she said, "Your father believed a lot of things he couldn't prove." "That's not an answer." "No," she said. "It isn't." Everyone who knew my father had learned that trick from him. They all answered questions by stepping around them. Before she hung up, my mother said one more thing. "Don't go out on the water alone." I asked why. She said, "Because he did." Then the line went dead. I spent that afternoon cleaning cabin 5. The Marshes had left it tidy. Beds stripped. Trash bagged. Towels in the tub. The kind of guests you want. On the small table near the window, Toby had drawn something on the back of a park brochure. It showed the dock, the rowboats, and a stick figure standing on the water side. The figure had no face. Above it, in block letters, he had written, "He knows your night name." I turned the brochure over. The front was a map of Rowan Lake. Someone had circled the East Pier in black pen. I stood there with the brochure in my hand and felt the cabin get colder. There was no air conditioning in cabin 5. I folded it and put it in the binder. After that, I started reading my father's old logs seriously. Most of the early entries were boring. Boat repairs. Weather. Guest complaints. Missing oars. Supply deliveries. Notes about bears getting into trash. Then, around 12 years before he disappeared, the strange notes began. They were rare at first. Door knocked 12:33. Did not open. Guest asked for cabin 6. Refused. Light out 2:17. Stayed inside. Bell rang once. No wind. Later they became more frequent. Radio used Tom's voice. Boat count 6. Waited until first light. East Pier man looked like Dad today. That one bothered me because my grandfather had died before I was born. Then, almost said his name, and a week later. Rule 7 is not about ghosts. There was no explanation after that. I read that sentence over and over. Rule 7 is not about ghosts. The lake returns what is named. Do not say the name of anyone you want back while looking at the water. Especially not mine. I had assumed my father believed the lake could mimic dead people. Maybe that was still true. But not about ghosts meant something else. I did not know what. I didn't know why it mattered yet. The next week was busy enough that I almost convinced myself things were settling down. A church group rented 3 cabins. 2 brothers came up for muskie fishing and drank too much beer. A woman from Chicago stayed in cabin 4 to hike alone and spent most of her time reading on the porch. Ordinary people. Ordinary problems. I checked people in. Sold night crawlers. Made coffee. Refilled the ice chest. Cleaned bathrooms. Cleared beer cans from fire pits. Reset the card reader. Balanced the drawer. Every night at 10 I counted the boats. Always 5. Every morning at 4 I set an alarm and counted again. Always 5. The porch light stayed on. No one knocked. The radio stayed quiet except for weather alerts and park chatter. The routine helped. That is the dangerous thing about routines. They make you believe that following them means you understand them. On my 10th night, the porch light went out. I was in the back room, half asleep, when I noticed the room had changed. It took me a moment to understand what was different. The thin yellow line under the office door was gone. I sat up. The wall heater clicked. Rain tapped the roof. I got dressed and walked into the office. The lake-facing windows were black. The porch light was off. Not dim. Not flickering. Off. The rule said keep it on from sunset until dawn. If it goes out after midnight, do not go outside to fix it. I looked at the clock. 2:17 a.m. I remember that exactly because my father had written that time in the logs more than once. Light out 2:17. Stayed inside. The switch for the porch light was beside the lake door. I flipped it down and up. Nothing. I tried again. Nothing. The bulb was probably blown. That was all. The replacement bulbs were in the storage closet by the coffee station. The fixture was right outside, above the door. It would take 30 seconds to change it. Unlock the door, step onto the porch, twist the old bulb out, put the new one in, come back inside. 30 seconds. I stood with one hand on the closet door. The office felt very large behind me. Outside, the lake made small wet sounds against the shore. Then the camera monitor beeped. It was an old system. It didn't usually beep. I walked behind the counter and looked. The dock camera was working. The parking lot was empty. The cabin row was still. The porch camera showed the outside of the lake door. The porch light was off, so the image was dark, but the camera had night vision. Grainy gray boards. Door. Window. Railing. And someone standing just beneath the light fixture. Their back was to the camera. They wore my father's brown canvas jacket. I knew that jacket. It was hanging in the mudroom closet. I had seen it that morning. The person on the porch lifted one arm slowly and pointed up at the dead bulb. Like they were helping. Like they wanted me to know what needed fixing. I backed away from the monitor. The person turned their head just a little. Not enough to show a face. Just enough to show they knew where the camera was. Then the radio behind me clicked on. Static filled the room. A dispatcher's voice said, "Warden 12, respond." It was faint. Old. Like a recording played through water. I did not move. The voice said, "Warden 12, do you copy?" Then clearer. "Ryan Martin Dorsey." My middle name had not been on any form at the lodge. Not the business license. Not the credit card system. Not the reservation desk. Ryan Martin Dorsey. The rule came back so hard it felt spoken in my ear. If the radio calls for Warden 12 and uses your full name, turn the volume all the way down and write the time in the log. Do not answer. I stepped to the radio. My hand shook so badly I missed the knob the first time. The voice said, "Ryan, this is your father." I turned the volume all the way down. The room went silent. On the camera monitor, the person in the brown jacket stood beneath the dead light, one hand still raised. I opened the logbook and wrote, 2:17 a.m., porch light out. Radio used full name. Did not answer. When I looked back at the monitor, the porch was empty. At dawn, the porch light was on again. Same bulb. It worked when I flipped the switch. My father's jacket was still in the mudroom closet, dry as dust. I called Art Vale at 7. His number was taped inside the counter drawer next to the septic company, propane company, and park emergency line. He answered like he had been awake for hours. "Vale. It's Ryan." "I know. I didn't like that," I said. "The porch light went out." "What time?" 2:17. He exhaled through his nose. "You went outside?" "No." "Good. The radio used my full name." "You answer?" "No." "Good." I waited for him to explain. He didn't. I said, "Art, what is going on here?" He said, "You got Leo's rules?" "Yes." "Then keep them." "That's not good enough. It kept him alive a long time. It didn't keep him alive forever." Art was quiet. Then he said, "No. It didn't." I heard something in his voice then. Not fear exactly. Guilt. "You know more than you're saying," I told him. "I know enough not to say more over a phone." "Then come out here." Another pause. "I'll come by after lunch." He did. He arrived in an old Park Service truck he clearly wasn't supposed to still have. The decals had been peeled off the doors, but you could still see their shadows in the paint. He came inside, took off his hat, and looked around the office like he expected the building to recognize him. I put the black binder on the counter. He didn't touch it. You've read it? He asked. Yes. All of it? Most. Art nodded. Leo ever tell you how he got this place? He bought it. From who? I don't know. Some family. The Parkers, Art said. Before that it was called Parker's Rowan Camp. Before that, the land belonged to the old quarry company. Before that, there was no lodge, no cabins. Just the lake and the fire trail. What does that have to do with anything? Maybe nothing. You drove all the way here to say maybe nothing? He looked tired then. Older than he had the week before. Your father didn't invent those rules. He inherited some of them. Changed others. Added the last to himself. Why? Because things changed after you were born. I didn't know what to say to that. Art looked toward the lake-facing windows. Leo tried to leave twice, he said. First time was after your mother moved out. Second time was about 10 years ago. Had the place listed with a broker and everything. Then a buyer came out from Denver. Young guy. Nice. Brought his wife and little girl. Your father walked them around the cabins, showed them the dock, let the girl ring the bell. Art rubbed his thumb over the rim of his coffee cup. That night, the buyer asked about cabin 6. There is no cabin 6. No. What happened? Leo took the listing down the next morning. I waited. That's it. The family drove off around noon. Never came back. Leo wouldn't talk about it. Did they disappear? No. I checked. He looked at me. They got home fine. Then what scared him? Art's eyes moved to the black binder. The little girl left a drawing on the counter. I thought of Toby's brochure. What did it show? You, Art said. The room seemed to tilt slightly. I was a kid. I know. What do you mean, me? Not as you were then. As you are now. I wanted to laugh again. I didn't. Art said, standing on the east pier. I looked toward the woods past cabin 5, where a narrow path led down to the older part of the shore. I haven't been to the east pier. I know. You keep saying that. Because I do. There was anger in my voice when I said, why didn't anyone tell me any of this before I came? Art looked at me for a long time. Because most people don't believe warnings until after they need them. That shut me up. He finished his coffee and set the cup down. Listen carefully. This place works on habits. It learns them. It repeats them. Some nights nothing happens because you do what you're supposed to. Some nights it tries a small thing to see if you'll bend. Don't bend. What is it? He glanced at the lake. I don't know. You were a ranger. I was a ranger, not a priest. Is it the lake? Art looked genuinely uncertain. Maybe. Maybe something in it. Maybe something under it. Maybe the place around it. The old-timers used to say Rowan Lake keeps poor records. What does that mean? It gives things back wrong. I thought of the receipt with my father's name. The knocking. The voice. Art said. Leo lasted because he stopped asking what it was. He focused on what worked. The rules. The rules. And when they don't work, they usually do. Usually. He picked up his hat. I'll come by in the morning for a few days. Until you get your feet under you. I don't want my feet under me here. Then sell it. Would anyone buy it? Art didn't answer. That was answer enough. Before he left, he walked to the lake door. The brass bell was visible through the side window if you leaned at the right angle. It hung near the east pier, dull and green with age. Art stared at it. Don't ring that unless the rule says. Why? Because bells are for calling. He put his hat on and went out through the front door. I watched his truck climb the service road until the trees took it. That evening, I almost called the broker listed in my father's old paperwork. Instead, I made coffee, checked in 2 guests, and counted the boats at 10. 5. At 11:30, I walked to the back room and lay down fully clothed. I didn't sleep. At midnight, nobody knocked. At 2:17, the porch light stayed on. At 4, I counted the boats again. 6. I counted them before I could stop myself. Green rowboat. Blue rowboat. Aluminum skiff. Red canoe. White rowboat. And something else at the far end of the dock. A narrow black boat. Long and low. It sat close to the water with no rope tying it in place. I stared through the window. My brain tried to make it into a shadow. The shadow of the dock rail. The shadow of the canoe. A log drifting near the boards. But it had a shape. Pointed bow. Flat stern. 1 oar across the middle seat. I almost counted again. That is the part that scared me most afterward. Not the boat. The urge to start over. It came from nowhere. A clean, simple thought. Maybe you counted wrong. I had my hand on the logbook. I was about to look from left to right again. Then I saw my father's handwriting in my head. If there are 6, stop counting and stay inside until sunrise. I closed my eyes. I wrote. 4 a.m., 6 boats. Did not count again. Then I sat behind the counter until dawn with every light in the office on. At 5:43, birds started making noise in the trees. At 6:10, the black boat was gone. At 6:15, I went outside. The dock boards were wet with dew. 5 boats knocked gently in their slips. No black boat. No rope marks. No oar. Nothing. But at the far end of the dock, on the cleat where the black boat had been, there was a strip of cloth tied in a simple knot. Brown canvas. I knew what it was before I touched it. A piece of my father's jacket. I went straight to the mudroom closet. The jacket was still hanging there. One sleeve had been cut from wrist to elbow. The edges were wet. I drove to Art's house that morning. I didn't call first. He lived in a park service duplex near the old South Gate, 25 minutes from the lodge. His truck was in the driveway. I knocked until he opened the door. He looked at my face and said, 6? I held up the strip of cloth. He let me in. His house was small and neat. Maps on the walls. Boots by the door. A police scanner on the kitchen counter. No family photos that I could see. I put the cloth on the table. Art didn't touch it. Jacket? He asked. My father's. Still inside? Yes. He poured coffee like we were discussing weather. I said, I'm leaving. Art nodded. That may be best. I mean today. Then leave today. That surprised me. You're not going to tell me I have to stay? No. What happens to the lodge? Maybe nothing for a while. And then? Someone else comes. That's it. He looked at me over his cup. Ryan, your father stayed because he thought it was his fault. What was? Feeding it. My stomach turned. Feeding it what? Attention. Names. Fear. I don't know. He used different words depending on the year. You're still not telling me. Art set down his coffee. Your father didn't always follow the rules. I waited. When you were 7, he broke Rule 7. I remembered being 7 only in pieces. A summer at the lodge. My mother smoking on the porch. My father teaching me to bait a hook. Cold lake water around my knees. The brass bell. What happened? I asked. You fell off the dock. I almost said no, then stopped. I did remember falling. Not clearly. A flash of sky. Water closing over my ears. My father's hand crushing my arm when he pulled me up. My mother crying so hard she couldn't speak. Art said, "You were under longer than you should have been." I was fine. Eventually. What does that mean? It means you didn't breathe at first. I sat down. The kitchen clock ticked loudly. Art continued quietly. Leo was on the dock holding you. Your mother was screaming. He looked at the lake and said your name. I swallowed. People say names when they panic. I know. That doesn't mean anything. Maybe not. But he thought it did. Art nodded. He said you opened your eyes before you coughed up water. Said you looked at him like you didn't know him? I was 7. Yes. What does this have to do with now? After that, the rules changed. The radio started using voices. The East Pier started showing him people. He told me the lake had learned your name from his mouth. I stood up so fast the chair scraped the floor. That's insane. Yes, Art said. He didn't argue. That made it worse. I walked to the window and looked out at his yard. A squirrel ran along the fence like everything in the world was normal. I said, "Do you think I'm not me?" Art didn't answer fast enough. I turned around. "Do you?" He looked ashamed. "I think you're Leo's son." "That isn't what I asked." "No." The room felt too small. I left without taking the strip of cloth. On the drive back to the lodge, I almost kept going. I could have turned onto the highway, driven south, and never looked back. I had my wallet, my phone, half a tank of gas. There was nothing at the lodge I couldn't abandon. But all my father's records were there. The deed. The bank papers. The keys. His truck. His ashes, if you counted the sealed box from the funeral home that my mother had mailed to the lodge because she didn't want them in her house. And there was something else. Anger. I was angry at my father for leaving me the lodge. Angry at Art for telling half-truths. Angry at my mother for keeping quiet. Angry at myself for being scared of water and paper and an old light. So I drove back. That is how places like that keep people. Not always by locking doors. Sometimes by making leaving feel like losing an argument. I spent that afternoon packing boxes anyway. I took down personal photos from the office wall. I gathered tax files, permits, and bank statements. I put my father's old notebooks into a plastic tote. I moved his ashes from the storage shelf to the counter. The box was plain cardboard with a white label. Leonard Martin Dorsey. I had not noticed until then that we shared a middle name. My mother had done that, probably. Or maybe my father had insisted. I set the box beside the register and looked at it for a while. Then I said, not looking toward the lake, "You bastard." Nothing happened. I laughed once. A real laugh this time. Small and bitter. Then the reservation bell on the counter rang. Not the brass bell outside. The little metal bell guests tapped when they came in, and I was in the back. Ding. I turned. No one was there. The front door was closed. The counter bell sat beside the register. Ding. I walked toward it slowly. There was a damp fingerprint on the silver button. Ding. The bell pressed itself down. I backed away. The office radio clicked on. Static. I moved toward it, ready to turn the volume down. But it was not the park channel. It was music. Old country music, faint and warped, like it was playing from another room. Then my father's voice said, "Marty?" I froze. Nobody called me Marty. Nobody except my father, when I was very young. It came from my middle name, Ryan Martin. Marty. I hated it when I got older and made him stop. The radio hissed. Marty, can you hear me? My hand hovered over the knob. The voice sounded like him. Not the wet voice from the door. Him. Tired. Dry. A little irritated, like he was calling from the garage and wanted me to hand him a wrench. Marty, don't talk. Just listen. That was clever. I know that now. The rules said do not answer. It did not say I couldn't listen. The voice said, Art doesn't know. He thinks he does, but he doesn't. It's not the lake that takes. It's the lodge. Your name is in the wood. Mine too. That's why I couldn't leave. I reached for the volume. The voice sharpened. Don't turn me down. I stopped. It said, Cabin 6 isn't a cabin. It's a door. I turned the volume all the way down. My heart was beating so hard I could feel it in my teeth. The radio needle kept jumping even with the sound off. I wrote the time in the log. 3:33 p.m., radio used family name. Did not answer. Then I looked again. The words were different. 3:33 p.m., Marty heard me. I threw the pen across the room. The logbook sat open on the counter. The new sentence remained. I did not pack anything else that day. That night, a man came in asking for cabin 6. He arrived at 8:20, just after sunset. I was behind the counter checking the emergency flashlight batteries. The porch light was on. The sky outside was the color of old metal. The front door opened, and the bell above it jingled. He was in his late 40s, maybe. Clean coat. Dark hair combed back. No luggage. No rain on his shoulders, though it had been misting for an hour. He smiled politely. Evening, he said. Evening. I have a reservation. What name? Parker. That made me look up. First name? Daniel. I typed it in. No reservation. What cabin? I asked, though I already knew. 6. I kept my hands on the keyboard. There is no cabin 6. His smile did not change. My family stayed there before. I remembered the rule. If someone insists they stayed in cabin 6 before, refuse once and step away from the counter. I'm sorry, I said. We only have 5 cabins. I can't help you. He looked past me toward the lake-facing windows. You can. I stepped away from the counter. His eyes moved back to me. Your father helped us. I said nothing. He was kinder than you. I kept stepping back until my shoulder touched the shelf behind me. The man placed both hands flat on the counter. They were normal hands, except the nails were packed with black mud. Cabin 6 is not for sleeping, he said. It's for waiting. I said nothing. His smile finally faded. You look like you did in the drawing. The office seemed to shrink around that sentence. He lifted one muddy hand and pointed at me. Older, though. Then the bell above the front door jingled again. I blinked. The man was gone. The door had not opened. No wet footprints on the floor. No mud on the counter. I waited 10 minutes before I moved. Then I checked the camera. The parking lot camera showed no car arriving. The front door camera showed no one entering. At 8:20, the recording glitched for exactly 1 frame. In that frame, the office was empty except for me behind the counter and someone standing behind me, close enough that their face would have been beside my ear. I could only see the edge of a brown jacket. I deleted the clip. Then I restored it from the recycle folder. Then I deleted it again. I didn't mention it to anyone. That was another mistake. By then, the season was moving toward fall. The mornings came cold. Fog sat on the lake until 9. The trees along the ridge started turning yellow at the tips. Business slowed during the week and picked up on weekends. I kept telling myself I would close after Labor Day. Then Labor Day came and went, and I stayed open because the park concession contract required 30 days' notice, and I did not want to talk to anyone about why I was quitting. So I made routines. Coffee at 6. Cabin checks at 9. Trash run at 11. Inventory after lunch. Boat rentals until sunset. Porch light on before dark. Boat count at 10. Door locked. Radio low. Alarm for 4. Boat count. Log everything. I learned that routine did not make the fear go away. It gave the fear a place to stand. Some nights nothing happened. Those were almost worse. I would sit behind the counter and wait for the knock, the radio, the impossible receipt. I would hear the ice machine drop cubes outside and almost jump out of my skin. I would see moths hitting the porch light and think they were fingers tapping the glass. Guests noticed I was tired. One woman asked if I was getting enough sleep. I said the lodge was busy. She looked around the empty office and said, "Sure." The old world kept behaving normally around the part that didn't. Bills came in. Mercer delivered bait every Thursday. A park inspector came to check fire extinguishers and said I needed to replace 2. The county sent a property tax notice. The card reader still froze twice a day. Once, while I was plunging the toilet in cabin 2, I heard my father call my name from the lakeside of the cabin. Not the wet voice. Not the radio voice. Just his normal voice, outside in the trees. "Ryan!" I stood there holding the plunger. The toilet gurgled. "Ryan, come here a second." I almost answered. That was the worst part. The everyday tone of it. Come here a second. Like he needed help carrying lumber or checking a fuse. I looked down at the plunger in my hand and said nothing. The voice called once more, a little farther away. "Marty?" I closed the bathroom door and waited until I could not hear my own heartbeat. When I finally went back to the lodge, there was a single wet boot print on the porch. Bare left foot inside it. No right. I started sleeping during the day when I could. At night, I stayed in the office. I moved an armchair behind the counter. I kept a thermos of coffee nearby. I put the black binder within reach. Art came by most mornings. He never stayed long. He checked the logbook, though he pretended he was only visiting for coffee. Sometimes he nodded. Sometimes he looked at an entry and went pale. On the morning after the man asking for cabin 6, he read the log twice. "Parker?" he asked. "That's what he said." "Daniel?" "Yes." Art sat down slowly. "You know him?" "No." "But—" He rubbed both hands over his face. "Daniel Parker was the man who sold the lodge to Leo." I stared at him. "When?" 30 years ago. "Is he dead?" "Last I heard, yes." "Last you heard?" "I don't keep up with dead men." I wanted to be angry, but I was too tired. "What was cabin 6? Art shook his head. "There was never a cabin 6. "That's not what I asked?" "No," he said softly. "It isn't." I hated him then. Not completely. But enough. "Why do you come here?" I asked. He looked at me. "Every morning." "Why?" "Because Leo asked me to." "When?" "Before he disappeared." "What exactly did he ask?" Art closed the binder. "He said if you ever came here, I should make sure you knew the rules." "That's all?" "No." "What else?" "He said if you started changing them, I should stop you." I frowned. Changing the rules? Art stood. You haven't, have you? No. He looked at the lake-facing door. Good. After he left, I checked the yellow paper. The rules were the same. But I noticed something I had missed before. The first 6 were written in black ink. The 7th was written in blue. Same handwriting. Different pen. Maybe added later. Under that the line, "Especially not mine," looked darker, pressed harder into the paper. I turned the page over. There was writing on the back. Not a full sentence. Just a list of names. Some crossed out. Daniel Parker. Evelyn Parker. Samuel Reed. Thomas Vale. Mary Dorsey. Ryan Martin Dorsey. My name was last. It was not crossed out. I took a picture of it with my phone. The picture showed blank paper. I tried again. Blank. I photocopied it using the office printer. Blank. I held it under the desk lamp. The names remained. I did not know a Thomas Vale. But Art's last name was Vale. That evening, I asked him by phone. The line was quiet for a while. Then he said, "Where did you see that name?" "In the binder." "Crossed out?" "Yes." He breathed out slowly. "My brother. What happened to him?" "Drowned." "In Rowan Lake?" "Yes." "When?" 1978. "Before my father bought the lodge." "Yes." "Was there a rule about him?" Art didn't answer. "Art," he said. "Tommy was 12. I was 15. We were staying here with our parents. Parker owned the place then. Tommy went down to fish at the East Pier before breakfast. I was supposed to go with him. But you didn't." "No." I waited. "They found his tackle box," Art said. "They found his hat. They never found him." I looked toward the lake. It had started to rain again. "Is that why you became a ranger?" "Maybe." "Why is his name crossed out?" Art's voice changed. "Do not read names from that list out loud." "I didn't." "Good. What does crossed out mean?" "It means don't ask for them." "I'm asking you. And I'm telling you not to ask." The line clicked. For a few seconds, I thought he had hung up. Then I heard faint water. Not through the window. Through the phone. A soft, hollow lapping sound. I said, "Art?" A boy's voice answered. "Arthur left me." I dropped the phone. It hit the floor behind the counter and cracked the screen. For the rest of the night, it lit up every few minutes with Art's caller ID. I did not answer. In the morning, Art came in like nothing had happened. He had coffee. He asked about the boats. He asked if the porch light stayed on. I asked if he had called me after we spoke. He said no. I showed him the phone. 26 missed calls. His face went still. "Delete them," he said. I did. He watched me do it. The false normal after that was worse than the incident itself. Because Art still drank his coffee. Mercer still delivered worms. The retired couple from Cabin 1 came back for another weekend and asked if I remembered them. I did. They had no idea they were staying 30 yards from a door that might not be a door and a lake that knew my childhood nickname. People kept coming. They laughed on the porch, took pictures of the sunrise, asked where the best fishing was. I told them the West Cove. I always told them the West Cove. No one was allowed to fish alone from the East Pier. That rule was easy at first. Most guests didn't even know the East Pier existed. It was older than the main dock, set down a narrow path past Cabin 5, half hidden by spruce and alder. My father had stopped maintaining it years ago. The boards were gray and warped, and a sign at the path entrance said closed for repair. I checked it every afternoon. Not the pier itself. Just the path. If I saw footprints, I followed far enough to make sure nobody was there. One Saturday in late September, 3 men in their 20s came up for a weekend fishing trip. They rented cabins 3 and 4, bought 2 cases of beer, and ignored half of what I told them. There is always a group like that. Not bad people. Just loud. They asked where the big fish were. I said West Cove. One of them asked about the old pier. I said it was closed. He said closed places usually meant good fishing. I said the boards were rotten and the park could find me if guests went out there. That worked better than warning him about anything else would have. At 10, I counted the boats. 5. At 12:30, I heard laughter outside. I checked the cabin camera. The 3 men were walking past cabin 5 with flashlights and fishing rods. Toward the east pier. I was out the front door before I fully thought about it. The rules said never let anyone fish alone from the east pier. They were not alone. That was the loophole my tired brain grabbed first. 3 men. Not alone. Still I ran. The night was cold and damp. My flashlight beam jumped across tree trunks and wet leaves. I could hear them ahead of me, laughing softly, trying to be quiet and failing. "Hey!" I called. The laughter stopped. One of them said, "Shit!" I reached the path entrance and saw their lights through the trees. "This area's closed," I said. "You need to come back." One of them, the tallest, turned toward me. "We're just looking." "With rods?" He held up both hands like I was being unreasonable. "Man, come on. We paid for cabins. And you'll get kicked out of them if you go down there." That did it. The other 2 started complaining, but they turned back. The tall one lingered. His name was Kyle. I remembered from the registration. He looked past me toward the lodge. "What about him?" he asked. I turned. There was a man standing at the start of the east pier path behind me. Not on the path where we were. Behind me, closer to the water. My flashlight hit him. Brown canvas jacket. Dark pants. Old work boots. My father. Or something wearing the shape I remembered. Not wet this time. Not pale. He stood under the trees with his hands in his pockets, had slightly lowered the way my father used to stand when he was tired. For a second, I forgot the guests. I forgot the rule. I forgot everything except the fact that I had spent years not calling him, and now he was 20 feet away. Kyle said, "Sir?" The thing that looked like my father lifted its head. I did not see its face clearly. My flashlight should have shown it. Instead, the beams seemed to soften around him. Like light didn't want to settle there. The rule hit me so hard I whispered it. "If you see your father there, ring the brass bell 3 times and look at your feet." The bell was past him. Near the pier. To ring it, I would have to walk toward him. That could not be right. I looked at Kyle and the others. "Back to the lodge," I said. Kyle whispered, "Is that your dad?" "No," the thing in the jacket said. "Brian." Kyle took 1 step back. The other 2 men had gone very quiet. The thing said, "Tell them I'm your father." I moved toward the bell. Not fast. Fast felt wrong. The thing watched me. I kept my eyes on the ground as much as I could. Pine needles. Mud. Roots. Wet leaves. My flashlight beam shook. When I got close enough, I reached out without looking directly up and found the cold metal bell. The thing whispered, "Marty." I rang it once. The sound was small but sharp. The woods seemed to hold it. The thing said, "Don't." I rang it twice. Behind me, one of the men started crying under his breath. I rang it the third time. Then I looked at my feet. The rule did not say run. It did not say pray. Just look at your feet. So I did. Mud around my boots. A thin root like a black vein. One crushed cigarette, but that could have been there for years. I heard footsteps on the pier. Slow. Wood creaking. Going away from me. Then another set of footsteps joined them. Smaller. Bare. Then another. Then another. The pier sounded crowded. Nobody spoke. Something dripped steadily onto the boards. I wanted to look. Every part of me wanted to look. Because one of those footsteps was my father's. I knew that without knowing how. But I looked at my boots until the sound stopped. When I lifted my head, the path was empty. The three guests were huddled together behind me. Kyle's face had gone white. He said, "What was that?" I said, "A bear." No one believed me. They left before sunrise. They didn't ask for a refund. The next morning, Art listened to what happened and said, "You rang the bell." The rule said to. "And you looked down?" "Yes." "How many sets of footsteps?" I didn't want to answer. "I don't know." "How many?" "4. Maybe 5. Art closed his eyes. "That many now." "What does that mean?" He shook his head. "Rule 6, I said. "It says never let anyone fish alone from the East Pier." They weren't alone. Art opened his eyes. "No. You misunderstood." I felt suddenly cold. "What?" "It doesn't mean don't let one person go there by themselves. That is exactly what it says. It means don't let anyone be alone with it." "With what?" "The lake. The pier. Whatever waits there." I stared at him. "The rule isn't about numbers," he said. "It's about attention. 3 drunk guests can be alone if none of them understand what's with them." I thought about Kyle asking, "What about him?" Art said, "If someone sees it and the others don't, that person is alone." I sat down behind the counter. The rule had changed without changing. That was the first time I understood how dangerous plain words could be in that place. Specific did not mean simple. Practical did not mean understood. I asked Art, "Why does it look like my father?" He looked toward the lake. "Because you came. And before me? Your father saw his father. Parker saw his wife. I saw Tommy once." My throat tightened. "What did you do?" I looked. He did not say more. But I saw his hand go to the side of his neck, where a pale scar ran under his collar. I had noticed it before and assumed it was from surgery. "Did Tommy come back?" I asked. Art smiled a little. It was the saddest expression I had ever seen. For a few minutes, we sat in silence. Then he said, "That's what Rule 7 is for. The lake returns what is named. Rule 7 is not about ghosts." I finally asked, "What does it return?" Art said, "Something that answers." By October, I stopped planning to sell. Not because I wanted to stay. Because I no longer trusted what would happen if someone else took over. That sounds noble. It wasn't. I was scared of being responsible. There is a difference. I imagined some young couple buying the lodge. Or a park contractor. Or a developer who wanted to tear it down and build something larger. I imagined them finding the yellow paper. I imagined them laughing. I imagined a child standing on the dock at night while her parents slept. So I stayed. I closed 2 cabins for repairs I wasn't doing. I removed online availability for weekdays. I told the concession office I was reducing operations through winter. They didn't care as long as insurance was paid. The fewer guests, the better. The lodge changed when the guests were gone. Not physically. It just felt less like a business and more like a masked building war during the day. At night, without cabin lights or car doors or voices by the fire pits, every small sound belonged to the place itself. The hum of the bait fridge. The knock of boats. The radio hiss. The slow settling of the porch boards when no one was walking on them. I began to notice patterns. The knocking at the lake door only happened when I was thinking about leaving. The radio used my full name only after I read the old logs. Cabin 6 appeared in the reservation system on nights when fog covered the lake. The 6th boat showed up when I was tired enough to doubt my count. The East Pier figure came when guests asked too many questions. It responded to attention. Art had said that. This place works on habits. It learns them. I tried to have fewer habits. I stopped drinking the same coffee. I changed the times I cleaned. I slept in different clothes. I moved the armchair. I switched which mug I used. I took my father's jacket from the mudroom and locked it in the safe. The next morning, it was hanging in the mudroom again. Dry. Sleeve cut. I left it there after that. On October 19th, the first snow came early. Not heavy, but enough to dust the trees and turn the service roads slick. I had one guest, a photographer named Linda who rented cabin 2 for 3 nights to take pictures of fog over the lake. She was quiet and polite. Too quiet, maybe, but by then I judged guests less by personality and more by whether they asked about the East Pier. She didn't. She paid cash, took her key, and asked if it was safe to walk at dawn. I said yes, as long as she stayed on the main trail. She smiled. I like water shots. West Shore has the best view. She looked toward the lake-facing window. What about that little pier through the trees? Closed. Shame. I said nothing. That night at 10, I counted 5 boats. At midnight, the lake door knocked. 3 soft taps. I stood behind the counter and waited. 3 more. I walked over. Closed until morning, I said. A woman's voice answered. I'm in cabin 2. Linda. I almost reached for the lock. Almost. Instead, I looked toward the cabin camera. Cabin 2's porch light was on. Her car was parked beside it. No one visible. The voice at the lake door said, I locked myself out. That was reasonable. Guests locked themselves out all the time. The spare keys were behind the counter. The lake door was closest to cabin 2 if you cut across the porch and yard. A person might knock there by mistake in the dark. Except the rule did not care why someone knocked. I said nothing. Hello? She called. Ryan? I stepped back. The voice became irritated. Come on, I'm freezing. I went behind the counter, picked up the office phone, and called cabin 2. It rang 4 times. Then Linda answered groggy. Hello? I closed my eyes. Sorry, I said. Wrong cabin. What? Sorry. Go back to sleep. I hung up. At the lake door, the woman laughed softly. Not Linda now. Not anyone I knew. Just a laugh. Then it said, Good. I did not sleep at all. In the morning, Linda came in for coffee and said she'd had strange dreams. I asked what kind. She shrugged. Someone knocking. I told her it was probably branches. She looked out at the lake. There aren't branches on that side. She left after one night. I didn't charge her for the other 2. That same morning, I found her camera on the porch. She came back for it 20 minutes after checkout, embarrassed. Before I gave it to her, I made the mistake of looking at the display. Most of the pictures were normal. Fog, trees, cabin lights, the dock. Then one taken at 4:03 a.m. The dock was 6 boats. The black boat at the end. And standing in the black boat, facing the lodge, was me. Not my reflection. Not a blur. Me. Wearing the clothes I had worn that night. Hands at my sides. Head tilted slightly toward the camera. I checked the timestamp. At 4:03, I had been behind the counter writing in the logbook. I deleted the picture. Then I deleted it from the camera's trash folder. When Linda came in, I handed it back and said I found it by the door. She thanked me and drove away. At 4 p.m., the office printer woke up. It printed the photo. Black and white. Grainy. Me in the black boat. Under the image, in the white margin, someone had written, Ryan Martin Dorsey, returned. I burned it in the wood stove. The smoke smelled like wet leaves. After that, I started locking up anything with my name on it. Receipts. Mail. Tax forms. Old school photos my father had kept in a shoebox. A baseball trophy from when I was 11. The deed. My birth certificate copy. I told myself it was symbolic. It wasn't. It was fear. I became afraid of my name. Not hearing it in normal ways. Guest said Ryan, and that was fine. The concession office called Mr. Dorsey, and that was fine. But my full name felt exposed. Like a door left open. At night, I caught myself avoiding mirrors. I stopped looking directly at the lake after dark. When I had to count boats, I looked only at the dock and moved my eyes quickly. Left to right. 5. Write it down. Step away. The lake seemed to notice. It got quieter. That sounds impossible, but it's true. The water stopped making normal water sounds some nights. No lapping. No little knocks against the dock. Even in wind, it sat flat and black and silent. On those nights, the lodge sounded too loud. The fridge. The heater. My breathing. The soft click of the wall clock. Sometimes the clock stopped. Always at 2:17. That was not one of the rules, but my father had written it in the logs. If clock stops, check light first. Do not check water. So I checked the light. Then I waited for the ticking to start again. By late October, Art stopped coming every morning. He was getting tired. I could see it. His hands shook when he poured coffee. His eyes had a sunken look. One morning, he came in carrying a cardboard box. He set it on the counter. "What's that?" "Leo's old ranger files." "My father wasn't a ranger." "No, but he helped on searches. Volunteer stuff. Before rules got strict." Inside were folders, maps, photocopied incident reports, old newspaper clippings, and handwritten statements. Most concerned drownings at Rowan Lake. There were more than I expected. Not dozens every year. Nothing that obvious. One every few years. Enough to look normal for a cold, deep lake in a national park. Fishermen fell in. Kids wandered. Boats capsized. Winter ice broke. But certain details repeated. No bodies recovered. Personal items found on the East Pier. Witnesses hearing voices. Radio interference. Lights seen in non-existent cabins. Names called from the water. The oldest clipping was from 1949. A quarry worker named Samuel Reed vanished near the lake before the park existed. His brother told the local paper that Samuel had come back to their bunkhouse 3 days later and knocked on the door after midnight. He was dripping wet and asking to be let in. The men refused because Samuel's body had been found that afternoon in a drainage ditch 7 miles away. That part had been underlined in red. I looked at Art. You said they don't find bodies. Usually they don't. What happened after they refused to let him in? Art pointed to the article. Bunkhouse burned the next night. Did people die? No. But the quarry closed within a month. I turned the page. There was a photograph of the old quarry camp. A long building. 5 small bunk cabins behind it. I looked up. Art nodded. The lodge was built on the same footprint. And cabin 6? There were 6 bunk cabins. I felt that cold opening in my stomach again. What happened to the 6th? Fire took it. Where was it? Art pointed out the lake-facing window. Between the lodge and the east pier. There was nothing there now but trees and slope and fog. I thought of Daniel Parker saying cabin 6 was not for sleeping. It's for waiting. Art said. I should have given you these sooner. Yes. I know. Why now? He looked older than ever. Because I heard Tommy last night. I said nothing. He was outside my bedroom window. Not here. My house. That scared me in a different way. Can it leave the lodge? Art shook his head. I don't know. You said habits. Attention. Names. I said I don't know. The anger in his voice startled me. Then it passed. He said, I'm sorry. For what? For letting Leo bring you here as a kid. My father brought me. And I told him it was safe if he followed the rules. We both looked at the lake. I thought of my 7-year-old self on the dock. My father saying my name. The water giving something back. Art, I said, what did my father mean when he wrote Rule 7 isn't about ghosts? He took a long time to answer. I think he meant it doesn't bring back the dead. What does it do? It brings back what the name means to you. I frowned. That doesn't make sense. No. But it did. In a bad way it did. If I said my father's name, maybe the lake wouldn't return my father. It would return guilt. Anger. Need. The version of him I had carried around for years. The unfinished argument. The apology I never got. Something wearing all of that. Something that knew exactly what I wanted to hear. Art said, that's why it gets worse when it learns you. I looked at the binder. And my name? His voice was low. Maybe it brings back what you mean to it. That night, I dreamed I was 7 again. I was on the dock with a fishing rod too big for my hands. My father was beside me, kneeling to untangle the line. My mother sat on the porch, smoking and watching us with that tense look she always had near him. The sky was bright. The lake was blue. In the dream, I dropped the rod. It slid off the dock. I reached for it. My father said, leave it. But I leaned farther. The water came up before I fell. Not splashed. Came up. Like a hand. I woke on the office floor. The clock said 2:17. I was not in the back room where I had fallen asleep. I was lying behind the counter with my cheek against the cold boards. The lake-facing door was open. The porch light was on. Cold air moved through the office. I did not remember opening the door. For a few seconds I couldn't move. Then I crawled to the door and pushed it shut. I locked it. My hands were numb. There was mud on my socks. Not shoes. Socks. I looked down. My shoes were gone. I found them at dawn on the east pier. Neatly placed side by side. Just like my father's boots had been found. That should have been the end. I should have left barefoot in my truck and never come back. Instead, I called Art. No answer. I called again. No answer. I drove to his house. His truck was there. His front door was unlocked. The house smelled like coffee gone cold. Art? No answer. The kitchen table was covered in papers. Maps of Rowan Lake. Copies of my father's rules. A photograph of two boys from the late 1970s, one taller, one smaller, standing on the lodge dock. On the back, someone had written, Arthur and Tommy, summer 1978. Art was not inside. I found him behind the house, sitting on a plastic chair facing the fence. At first, I thought he was dead. Then he turned his head. His eyes were open but unfocused. Art? He blinked slowly. He came to the window, he said. Tommy? He nodded. He was cold. I crouched in front of him. You let him in? Art started crying. Quietly. Like an old man who did not have the strength to be ashamed. I only opened the curtain. I drove him to the clinic in town. He kept asking if his brother was in the back seat. No one was. At least, no one I could see. The doctor said Art was dehydrated and sleep-deprived. They wanted to keep him overnight for observation. He argued, then forgot what he was arguing about. Before they took him back, he grabbed my wrist. Don't change the rules, he said. I won't. If you see me there, don't open. I won't. Not even if I ask right. His grip tightened. Especially if I ask right. I stayed until they made me leave. It was dark by the time I got back to the lodge. I should not have driven that road tired. Snow had melted and were frozen in patches. The headlights caught deer eyes twice in the trees. My phone had no signal before I reached the park boundary. When the lodge came into view, the porch light was on. I felt such relief that I almost laughed. Then I saw the truck in the parking lot. An old Park Service truck with peeled-off decals. Art's truck. I stopped beside it and sat with both hands on the wheel. The truck was empty. No frost on the windshield. No tire tracks leading in, though the lot was soft with mud. The front door of the lodge stood open. Light spilled onto the gravel. I took the tire iron from behind my seat and went in. The office was warm. The coffee pot was half full. The black binder was open on the counter. The radio was on but silent. Art? I called. My voice sounded wrong in the room. No answer. The binder was open to the yellow rules page. There were still 7 rules. But Rule 3 had changed. It no longer said, if someone knocks on the lake-facing door after midnight, answer without opening it and say, closed until morning. Say nothing else. Now it said, if someone knocks on the lake-facing door after midnight, answer without opening it and say, closed until morning. Say nothing else, even if the voice belongs to Arthur Vale. I stared at the page. The ink looked old. Not fresh. Not wet. As if it had always been there. I checked the back of the paper. The list of names had changed too. Thomas Vale was still crossed out. Arthur Vale had been added underneath. Not crossed out. Not yet. The radio clicked. I turned the volume down before it could speak. Then came 3 soft knocks at the lake-facing door. I looked at the clock. 12:01. I had lost time. Maybe standing there. Maybe before. The knocks came again. 3 soft taps. I walked to the door. I did not touch the curtain. Closed until morning, I said. Art's voice answered. Ryan, I'm hurt. I closed my eyes. He sounded exactly like he had at the clinic. Weak. Confused. Frightened. Please, he said. I don't know where I am. I said nothing. I walked from the road. I fell. I looked down at the gap under the door. Water seeped through in a thin, dark line. Not much. Just enough to shine on the floor. Ryan, Art whispered. Tommy's with me. I backed away. There was another voice then. A boy. Arthur left me. The office lights dimmed. Not out. Just low enough that every shadow thickened. The boy said, You left yours too. I didn't know who he meant. My father. My mother. The 7-year-old version of myself on the dock. Maybe all of them. Art's voice said, Open the door. I did not. He began to cry. I stood there until the crying stopped. At dawn, Art's truck was gone. At 8, the clinic called. They said Art had become agitated during the night and tried to leave. A nurse found him in the stairwell at 12:06 a.m. He had fallen and cut his forehead, but he was alive. Did he say anything? I asked. The nurse hesitated. He kept asking if someone opened a door. I said no. I don't know why. Art did not come back to the lodge after that. His niece took him south to live with her. Before he left, he mailed me one envelope. Inside was a key and a note. The key was small and old. The note said, For the safe under the ranger desk. Burn what you can. Do not read out loud. Do not add yourself to anything. I'm sorry. The old ranger outpost sat behind the lodge, half hidden by pine trees. I had mostly ignored it. The building had one room, boarded windows, a radio mast, and a desk bolted to the floor. The Park Service had stopped using it long before I arrived. My father stored broken oars and spare buoys there. The key opened a metal floor safe beneath the desk. Inside were more notebooks. Not my father's. Older. Parker's, maybe. Some pages were moldy. Some were stuck together. The handwriting changed several times. Different owners. Different years. The rules appeared in pieces. At first, there were only 3. Keep a light on the water. Do not open after knocking. Do not give the 6th cabin. Then 4. Do not answer Warden 12. Then 5. Count the boats. Then 6. No one alone on the East Pier. Rule 7 did not appear until my father. The lake returns what is named. But there were other notes about names going back decades. Names heard from drainpipes. Names scratched into frost. Names printed on receipts before registers existed. One page from 1963 said, It does not know a man until someone gives him to it. Another said, A name spoken in love binds tighter than a name spoken in fear. Another, It keeps the shape of wanting. I sat on the floor of the ranger outpost for hours reading by flashlight, while the afternoon died outside. I should have burned them unread. I know that. But there is a sickness in needing to understand the thing that is hurting you. You tell yourself knowledge is protection. Sometimes it is only another way of looking. The final notebook was my father's. Not the lodge log. Personal. I recognized the handwriting immediately, though it was messier than usual. The first page was dated 3 months before he disappeared. Ryan came today and Parker girl's drawing again. I turned the page. I shouldn't have. The next entries were short. He stands on East Pier older than he is. Sometimes he is wet. Sometimes he looks dry. He does not speak unless I say his name first. I have not said it. A week later. The lake does not want the dead. Dead are easy. It wants the living remembered too strongly. Another. I think I kept him here. Not his body. Not his soul. The place where my fear of losing him went. That is what answers. Another. If Ryan comes after I am gone, do not let him think the thing is me. I stopped reading. For a while, I just sat there in the cold outpost with the notebook open on my lap. Then I kept going. Because by then I had already looked. The last entry was dated the morning my father disappeared. I heard him under the dock before dawn. Not my father. Not Parker. Ryan. Small voice. 7 years old. He asked why I pulled the wrong one out. That sentence broke something in me. I read it again and again. He asked why I pulled the wrong one out. My father had pulled me from the lake when I was 7. I had lived. I had grown up. I had left. I had come back. I sat there trying to remember the moment after the water. I remembered my father's hands. My mother screaming. The taste of mud. But memory is unreliable. Especially childhood memory. Especially memory people have told back to you so many times that you don't know which parts are yours. That night, I did not count the boats at 10. I forgot. That sounds impossible after everything, but I did. I was in the ranger outpost until after 11. When I came back to the lodge, numb and cold, I saw the logbook on the counter and realized the line for 10 p.m. was blank. For one wild second, I thought I could just write 5. Nobody would know. Then the boats knocked against the dock outside. All of them. Together. 5 hollow knocks. Then a 6th. I stood behind the counter. The porch light burned steady. The lake-facing windows reflected the office back at me. I could see myself standing there. Behind my reflection, the black binder sat on the counter. Behind that, the radio. Behind that, the lake door. And behind that, in the reflection only, a small boy stood in the open doorway to the back room. 7 years old. Wet hair. Blue lips. My face. I turned around. The back room doorway was empty. I looked at the window again. The boy remained in the reflection. He raised one hand. I did not raise mine. He mouthed something. I knew what it was before I could read it. Why? The radio clicked on. I moved fast and turned it down. But not before I heard my father's voice say, "I'm sorry, Marty." I wrote in the log. 11:14 p.m., missed 10 o'clock count. Did not look again. Radio used nickname. Did not answer. The pen moved under my hand. Not with me. Against me. It finished the sentence. He answered first. I let go. The ink dried quickly. I spent the rest of the night sitting in the armchair, watching the lake door. At 4 a.m., I counted the boats. I had to. 5. No black boat. But on the dock, near the cleat at the far end, sat a child's fishing rod. Small. Red handle. Plastic reel. I owned one like that when I was 7. At dawn, it was gone. Winter came early that year. By November, the lodge was officially closed to guests. The park road stayed open for rangers and maintenance, but tourists stopped coming. Snow gathered along the cabin roofs. The lake did not freeze all at once. Ice formed in thin plates near shore and broke apart every afternoon, clicking softly against the dock. I should have left then. I told myself I was winterizing. Draining pipes. Shutting off cabins. Covering boats. Closing accounts. Every day I found another reason to stay one more night. A storm coming. Paperwork unfinished. Arts files still to sort. The service road too icy. The truth was simpler. I had become afraid of what the place would do when unwatched. That is how it gets you too. Responsibility becomes a chain. The rules changed twice that winter. Not all at once. Small additions. Rule 1 gained a second line. If the porch light burns blue, cover the windows until it turns yellow again. Rule 5 gained. Do not count reflections. I did not see the writing appear. It was just there one morning, in my father's handwriting, pressed into the old yellow paper like it had been written years earlier. I wanted to call Art. But Art was gone. His niece answered once and said he was resting. She sounded protective and tired. I did not call again. I became the only person keeping the rules. That was when the place became personal in a way I can barely explain. It stopped using my father first. For weeks, I didn't hear him. No knocks with his voice. No radio calls. No brown jacket on the porch. Instead, it used me. My voice from the bait shed. My cough from cabin 3. My footsteps upstairs, though there was no upstairs. Once I heard myself laughing from under the dock. Not a loud laugh. Just a quiet one, like I had heard something funny and didn't want to wake anyone. I would stand still and wait. I would not answer. At night, the office computer printed reservations for me. Cabin 6. Guest name, Ryan Dorsey. Cabin 6. Guest name, R. Martin. Cabin 6. Guest name, the one returned. I burned them all. The lake-facing door knocked almost every night after midnight. Sometimes it was my father. Sometimes Art. Sometimes my mother, which was worse because she was still alive. The first time I heard her, I almost broke. "Ryan," she said from the porch, "I made a mistake." I stood 6 feet from the door. Snow scratched against the windows. "Closed until morning," I said. She sobbed. "I should have told you." I said nothing. "I should have come back for you." My hand went to the lock. I still don't know whether I meant to open it. Then the phone rang behind me. It was my mother's real number. I answered without thinking. She said, "Are you okay?" I turned slowly toward the lake door. The voice outside stopped crying. My real mother said, "Ryan?" I woke up with the worst feeling. I looked at the lock. My fingers were still touching it. "I'm okay," I said. "You don't sound okay." "I'm just tired." Behind the door, my mother's voice whispered, "Don't tell her." I backed away and hung up. In the morning, I called my real mother again and told her not to call the lodge after dark. She asked why. I said the phone lines were bad. She said, "You sound like your father." I almost said his name. I was standing at the window. The lake was white with fog. My mouth had already shaped the first sound. I bit my tongue so hard it bled. My mother kept talking. I don't remember what she said. I only remember looking at the fog and realizing how easy it would have been. A name spoken in love binds tighter than a name spoken in fear. After that, I put tape over the lake-facing windows at night. Not completely. I needed to count the boats. But I covered most of the glass with cardboard and old maps, leaving one narrow slit aimed at the dock. It helped for a while. The world became smaller. Counter. Logbook. Radio. Slit of dock. 5 boats. Door. Coffee. Clock. I began recording audio at night with a little digital recorder I found in my father's desk. In the morning, I listened back. Most nights were normal. Heater. Wind. My chair creaking. Distant ice cracking. On December 3rd, at 2:17 a.m., the recording caught my voice whispering for 12 straight minutes. I had no memory of speaking. The words were hard to make out at first. Then I cleaned the audio on the old computer. It was a list of names. Daniel Parker. Evelyn Parker. Samuel Reed. Thomas Vale, Arthur Vale, Leonard Martin Dorsey, Ryan Martin Dorsey. Then it started over. Same order. Same flat voice. At the end, my voice said, "No one crossed out stays crossed out." I destroyed the recorder. I should have destroyed the computer too. The final week before Christmas, the lake froze except for a long black channel running from the dock to the east pier. No matter how cold it got, that channel stayed open. Steam rose from it in the mornings. The park sent 2 maintenance men to check the water lines. I told them the cabins were shut and everything was fine. One of them asked why the east pier wasn't frozen in. I said there was a spring under it. He nodded like that made sense. Maybe it did. Most lies work because they sound close to normal. On December 21st, I got a letter from the concession office. They were sending a new winter caretaker for the upper road cabins, and he would stop by the lodge once a week for supply checks. His name was Mark Heller. He was 26, former ski lift mechanic, seasonal contract. I called the office immediately and said I didn't need help. They said it wasn't help. It was policy. I said the lodge was closed. They said all park structures had to be checked through winter. I asked if they could assign someone else. The woman on the phone got annoyed and said, "Mr. Dorsey, is there a problem with Mr. Heller?" I almost said yes. I almost said there was a problem with anyone new learning the shape of this place. Instead, I said no. Mark arrived 2 days later. He was exactly the kind of guy I used to be before the lodge hollowed me out. Friendly. Practical. A little bored. He wore a red knit cap and carried a clipboard. "Ryan?" he said, coming in with a gust of cold air. I nodded. "Mark Heller. They told you I'd be stopping by?" "Yeah. Nice place." "No, it isn't." He laughed because he thought I was joking. I gave him coffee. He walked the building, checked fire extinguishers, looked at the generator, made notes about the dock. I stayed close. Too close, probably. He noticed. "You don't have to babysit me," he said. "Insurance thing." "Sure." At the lake-facing windows, he paused. "Beautiful view. Better in summer." He looked at the cardboard and maps taped over most of the glass. "Insulation?" "Drafts." He nodded. Then he pointed through the narrow slit. "How many boats you keep out there?" My whole body tightened. 5. He leaned closer. "I see 6. I grabbed his shoulder and pulled him back hard enough that he stumbled. "What the hell?" "Don't count them." "What?" "Don't count them again." He stared at me. I knew what I looked like. Unshaven. Pale. Sleeping badly. Talking like a man in a story people tell later as a warning. I let go of his coat. "Sorry," I said. "Dock's unsafe. I don't want anyone near it." He looked through the slit again before I could stop him. His face changed. Not fear. Confusion. "There are 5, he said. I said nothing. He left soon after. I watched his truck drive up the service road and knew the lodge had noticed him. At 12:04 that night, someone knocked on the lake door. 3 soft taps. I said, "Closed until morning." Mark's voice answered. "Forgot my clipboard." I looked at the counter. His clipboard was sitting there. I had not noticed it. He must have left it. That made sense. But I had watched him drive away with it under his arm. I said nothing. "Ryan?" Mark called. "Come on, man. It's freezing." I picked up the clipboard. Water ran from the metal clip onto the counter. The top form was blank except for one note written in Mark's handwriting. "Rule 8? I stepped back from it. There were only 7 rules. The lake doorknob turned once. Locked. Mark's voice lowered. I see why you stayed. Then it was quiet. In the morning, the clipboard was dry. The note was gone. When real Mark came back the next week, I told him he couldn't stop by after sunset. He asked why. I said bears. He looked at the snow-covered world outside and said, Bears. Just don't. He studied me. You okay out here? No. That was the first honest answer I'd given anyone in weeks. He didn't laugh that time. You need me to call someone? I almost said yes. Then the radio behind the counter clicked once. Not on. Just a little sound. A reminder. I said, no. Mark came every Wednesday after that. I learned to dread Wednesdays and look forward to them. He brought groceries from town sometimes. Coffee. Batteries. A newspaper. Once, a bag of oranges because he said I looked like I had scurvy. I did not tell him the rules. Not at first. That was stupid and selfish. I told myself fewer people knowing meant fewer people feeding the place attention. But the truth was I didn't want him to look at me like I was crazy. Then, on January 7th, he arrived with a cut on his cheek. What happened? I asked. He touched it like he had forgotten it was there. Branch. It's a straight line. Sharp branch. He poured coffee and didn't meet my eyes. I said, Mark. He looked toward the lake. I stopped at the overlook on the way down. He said. My stomach dropped. What overlook? Above the east shore. There's a pullout. I know it. I heard someone yelling. I set my mug down. He said. Sounded like a kid. Down by the water. I closed my eyes. Did you go down? No. Too steep. Good. But I looked. His hand went to the cut again. There was a boy on the ice. I said nothing. He looked like you. The office heater ticked. Mark said. Small. Like 7 or 8. He was waving at me. I pulled the black binder from under the counter. My hands were steady. That surprised me. I opened to the yellow page and turned it toward him. Read these, I said. He stared at me. Ryan. Read them. Are you serious? Yes. He looked at the paper. I watched his face change as he went down the list. By the time he reached Rule 7, his mouth had gone tight. What is this? Rules. For what? For staying alive here. He tried to hand the binder back. I didn't take it. Keep reading until you remember them. I'm not doing this. Then don't come back. He stared at me. I meant it. He saw that. Mark left angry. At 4 a.m., there were 6 boats. The 6th was not black this time. It was orange. A little plastic rescue boat. The kind kept at park stations for ice emergencies. Inside it was Mark's red knit cap. I stopped counting. I wrote it down. Then I sat behind the counter and waited for daylight, whispering, Don't come back. Under my breath like a prayer. He came back the next afternoon. He looked like he hadn't slept. He placed the red knit cap on the counter. It was frozen stiff. Found it on my porch, he said. I said, I told you. No, he said. You showed me a crazy list. You didn't tell me anything. So I told him. Not everything. Enough. The knocks. The radio. Cabin 6. The boat counts. Art. My father. The names. Mark listened without interrupting. When I finished, he sat there for a long time. Then he said, Okay. That was all. Okay? I don't know if I believe all of it, he said. But I believe you believe it. And I saw that kid. He stayed until sunset helping me check locks and cameras. Before he left, he read the rules again. At the door, he said, "You can't do this alone." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "That's what Rule 6 says." He didn't smile. Mark started coming twice a week. I should have stopped him. I didn't. Having another person in the lodge during daylight made me feel human again. We fixed the porch step on cabin 5. We serviced the generator. We cleared snow from the shed roof. We replaced 2 camera cables. He asked practical questions. "What if the porch light goes out at 11:59? Fix it from inside if you can. Don't go out after midnight. What if someone knocks at 11:58 and keeps knocking past 12? I don't know. What if cabin 6 shows up online? Block the reservation. What if I hear my own full name on the radio? Turn it down. What's Warden 12? I don't know." He hated that answer. So did I. We found Warden 12 in one of the old Ranger files. It was a call sign used in the 1960s for the Rowan Lake Patrol Unit. The patrol boat sank during a storm in 1968. The ranger on board, Evelyn Parker, was never found. Parker. Daniel Parker's wife. Another name on the back of the rules. Mark read the report twice. "So the radio calling Warden 12 means what? Her? Maybe. Or the patrol boat? Maybe. Or the thing pretending to be official so you answer?" I looked at him. He shrugged. "I fix lifts. Machines do that. Throw normal warnings during abnormal failures." That was Mark. He made it almost bearable by refusing to make it mystical. On January 26th, the porch light burned blue. I noticed just after midnight. The office changed color. Not bright blue, not neon. Just a cold blue tint leaking around the cardboard windows. Rule 1 had changed for this. If the porch light burns blue, cover the windows until it turns yellow again. Most of the windows were already covered. The slit aimed at the dock was not. I reached for the strip of cardboard I kept nearby and moved toward it. Mark was there that night. Snow had come hard, and the road was bad, so he decided to sleep on the cot in the storage room. He woke when I got up. "What is it?" "Light." He saw the blue glow and went still. I said, "Don't look outside." He sat up. "I'm not." I covered the slit. For a moment, the blue light shone around the edges of the cardboard. Then something outside moved across the porch. We heard it pass the windows. Slow. Dragging. Mark whispered, "Door?" "No." The sound stopped at the lake-facing door. 3 soft knocks. I checked the clock. 12:12. I said, "Closed until morning." The voice that answered was my own. "You already opened." Mark looked at me. I shook my head. The voice said, "Ask him." Mark mouthed, "Asked who?" The voice said, "Ask Mark what he saw under the ice." Mark stood very still. I looked at him. He would not look back. The voice outside said, "Ask him why he came twice." "Closed until morning," I said again. The voice laughed softly. "You only get once." The blue light brightened around the cardboard. The door hinges creaked. Not opening. Just taking weight. Like someone had leaned their forehead against the other side. My voice whispered, "Mark Heller." Mark flinched. Full name. Not through the radio. Through the door. The rules did not say what to do if the door used your full name. He looked at me, panicked. I put one finger to my lips. the thing outside said. Mark Heller, your brother is cold. Mark's face changed. I had not known he had a brother. He stepped toward the door. I grabbed his arm. He pulled once, hard. Don't, I whispered. The thing said. He keeps asking why you didn't hold the rope. Mark went slack. I held him. I could feel him shaking. The blue light faded slowly. Yellow returned around the cardboard. The weight left the door. We stood like that for a long time. Finally, Mark whispered, My brother died climbing. I said nothing. He fell. I had the rope. You don't have to tell me. I know. He sat down on the floor. It shouldn't know that. No. He laughed once, broken. Okay, he said. Now I believe you. In the morning, we found frost on the inside of the lake door. Written in it with a fingertip were 2 words. Rule 8. Mark wanted to leave and call the park police. I said he should. He asked if I was coming. I said no. We argued for almost an hour. Not loudly at first. Then loudly. He said I was acting like a prisoner. I said he didn't understand. He said I was making myself part of it. I said maybe I already was. That shut him up. He looked at me with pity, which was worse than fear. Ryan, he said, this place wants you isolated. I know. Then stop helping it. I wanted him to be right. More than anything. So I packed a bag. I put the binder in it. My father's notebook. The old files. The yellow rules. My wallet. Phone. Keys. Mark watched me like he expected me to change my mind. I almost did. At the front door, the office printer started. It printed 1 page. Mark reached it before I could stop him. He read it. His face went pale. What? I asked. He didn't answer. I took the page. It was a receipt. Cabin 6. Guest name, Mark Heller. Paid in cash. Check-in time, tomorrow, 12:01 a.m. Balance due, 1 name. Mark said, That's not real. No. But we both knew real was not the point. He took the receipt and tore it in half. Then quarters. Then smaller pieces. He threw them in the wood stove and lit a match. We watched the pieces burn. From inside the stove, his brother's voice said, Mark? Mark staggered back. I shut the stove door. He left without me. Not because he was angry. Because I asked him to. I told him to go to the ranger station, report whatever he wanted, and not come back until morning with other people. He said leaving me alone was exactly what it wanted. I said staying might be worse. That was the last normal conversation we had. At 10 that night, I counted the boats. 5. At midnight, no one knocked. At 12:01, the reservation system chimed. A check-in notification appeared. Cabin 6 occupied. Guest, Mark Heller. I turned off the monitor. The radio clicked on. I turned the volume down. The printer started. I unplugged it. The lake door knocked. I said, Closed until morning. Mark's voice said, I didn't make it to the road. I said nothing. I slid into the ditch. Nothing. I'm bleeding. Nothing. Ryan, please. Nothing. Then he said in a calm voice, I know you can hear the water behind me. I could. Not outside. Behind me. I turned. Water was seeping from under the storage room door. Slowly. A dark line spreading across the office floor. Mark's cot was in there. So were the spare blankets, tools, breaker panel, and back stairs to the cellar. The rule was only about the lake-facing door. not the storage room. That is how it works. It finds the edge of the sentence. The water spread another inch. I walked backward toward the counter and grabbed the flashlight. The knocking continued behind me. Mark's voice at the lake door said, "Don't open that one either." I stood between two doors. One with the voice begging. One with water coming under it. The ordinary explanation came first, because it always does. Pipe burst. Snow melt. Water heater. If I didn't shut it off, the lodge could flood. The breaker could short. The whole place could burn. I moved toward the storage room. The floor was cold through my socks. My hand touched the knob. The lake door knocked once. Hard. Not polite now. The whole office shook. Mark's voice said, "Ryan Martin Dorsey." Full name. Not radio. Door. The storage room knob turned under my hand by itself. From inside, my own voice said, "I'm in here." I let go. The water stopped spreading. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the storage room door opened inward 1 inch. No more. Just enough to show darkness. A child's voice whispered, "Why did he pull you out?" I did not answer. "Why did he leave me?" I backed away until I hit the counter. The lake door began knocking again. 3 soft taps. Like it was starting over. I said, "Closed until morning." The child in the storage room said, "Morning for who?" I don't know how long I stood there. The clock had stopped at 2:17. The porch light stayed yellow. The water on the floor reflected the covered windows, the counter, my legs. Then I saw another reflection in it. A man standing behind me in the brown jacket. I did not turn. The reflection placed one hand on my shoulder. I felt nothing. It bent close to my ear. My father's voice whispered, "Rule 7 isn't about keeping me out." I closed my eyes. "It's about keeping you in," I said. "You're not him." "No." At least it was honest. "Where is he?" The reflection smiled in the water. I had asked a question. That was another mistake. The storage room door opened another inch. The child's voice said, "He named the wrong one." The lake door unlocked. I heard the bolt slide. Not because I touched it. Because something did. The door opened slowly. Cold air entered the room. I still did not turn. In the water on the floor, I saw the open doorway reflected upside down. Porch boards. Yellow light. Snow. And beyond that, the lake. There was a figure on the porch. Not my father. Not Mark. Me. The version from Linda's photograph. Adult me. Standing outside in the cold, looking in. His clothes were wet. His face was calm. He said, "You can leave now." I wanted to. God help me, I wanted to more than I have ever wanted anything. He stepped back from the doorway, making room. "All you have to do is say which one you are." The child in the storage room began to cry. The reflection of my father kept its hand on my shoulder. The thing wearing my face waited outside. I understood then, or thought I did. Maybe there had been 2 of me since I was 7. Maybe that was madness. Maybe one was memory, and one was flesh. Maybe the lake did not care which was which as long as someone answered. The yellow rules page lay on the counter within reach. I picked it up. My hand shook so hard the paper rattled. There were 8 rules now. The 8th was written at the bottom in blue ink. 8. If you meet yourself at the door, do not ask which one came back. I laughed. One small breath. Of course. Too late, but there it was. The thing outside said, "Ryan." Not my full name. Just Ryan. Gentle. almost kind. I looked at the water on the floor instead of at him. "The lake returns what is named," he said. The child sobbed harder. My father's reflection leaned closer. The thing outside said, "Name him." I knew who he meant. My father. Say his name and maybe something would come back. An answer. An apology. A reason. Maybe even the truth. I had carried his name like a stone in my mouth for months. Leonard Martin Dorsey. Leo. Dad. The man who stayed. The man who left. The man who pulled me from the lake and spent the rest of his life wondering what he had saved. I wanted him back. Not forever. Just long enough to ask him why. The rule had always known that. I looked toward the open door. Not at the lake. At the threshold. The thing wearing my face smiled. I almost said it. The first sound rose in my throat. Then the brass bell rang outside. Once. The sound cut through the room. The thing on the porch turned its head. The bell rang again. The child stopped crying. The bell rang a third time. I looked at my feet. I don't know why. Habit, maybe? Or the last good thing art had given me. Mud. Water. My socks. A strip of brown canvas floating near the counter. The porch boards creaked. Many footsteps moved away from the door. Adult boots. Child feet. Something dragging. Something light. Something heavy. The storage room door shut. The lake door shut. The bolt slid back into place. When I looked up, the office was empty. The clock ticked again. 2:18. I do not know who rang the bell. In the morning, Mark's truck was in the parking lot. He was asleep inside with the engine off, wrapped in a blanket, face pale from cold but alive. He said he had driven halfway up the service road and seen someone standing in front of his truck. A boy. He swerved into the ditch, but not badly. When he got out, he heard the bell from the lodge. 3 times. He remembered walking down through the snow. He remembered reaching the East Pier. He did not remember ringing it. His hands were green with tarnish. I told him to leave and never come back. This time he did. The park closed the lower road 2 days later because of weather. Officially, I left the lodge in January. That is what the paperwork says. The concession office has emails from me resigning the contract. My mother says I came to stay with her for a week in February. Mark Heller says he met me once in town for coffee and I looked better. I remember some of that. Not all. Memory has soft places now. I live in an apartment 3 hours south. I work nights dispatching trucks again. I sleep with a lamp on. I do not go near lakes. I do not say my father's name near water. I thought that meant I got out. Last week, a package arrived with no return address. Inside was the black binder. The yellow rules page was folded in the front pocket. There are 9 rules now. The 9th is written in my handwriting. 9. If Ryan comes back to the lodge, do not let him in after midnight. I called Mark. He said he hadn't sent it. I called Art's niece. She said Art died in April. Peacefully, she said. In his sleep. I asked if he left anything for me. She said no. Then she paused and asked why I wanted to know. I told her it was nothing. I didn't mention that the back of the yellow page had a new name. Mark Heller. Not crossed out. Under his name, another had been added. Not my mother's full name. Just Mom. That scared me more. Because I never wrote her name down. Tonight, when I came home from work, there was mud on the floor outside my apartment door. Not a lot. Just one wet footprint. Bare left foot. No, right. I stood in the hall for a long time before I unlocked the door. The porch light from the building across the street was shining through the window. For a second it looked blue, then yellow. My phone rang at 12:04. No caller ID. I let it ring. After the third ring, a voicemail appeared. I have not played it. I already know there will be water behind the voice. And I know, sooner or later, it will use my full name.